Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the IAC Culture Talks 2025 series. I'm Professor Jing Han, the Director of the Institute for Australian Asian Arts and Culture at Western Sydney University. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the land of the grammatical people of the Dour Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land for thousands of years, and pay our respect to the First Nations elders, past and present. Today, we are having lecture number 3, focusing on the amazing Japanese sense of humor. What an interesting topic. People generally, over the past 50 years, he has translated prose, drama, and poetry from Japanese, Russian, and Polish. Now, please welcome Professor Roger Pulvers, AM, to give the presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Han, for that all too kind introduction, and welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining in on this talk. Now, when I thought of giving a talk about the Japanese sense of humor, I recalled that many people around the world think that the Japanese don't have much of a sense of humor and that 45 minutes would be much too long to cover such a short topic. But actually, the Japanese sense of humor is very sophisticated, witty, subtle, and wry, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. Now, when a Japanese starts a speech, almost invariably, they begin by making an apology. When Westerners start a speech, they often tell a joke at the beginning. So I'm going to avail myself of both traditions and apologize for telling a joke. And the joke is actually not a Japanese one, but it's a Russian one. But I'm going to use it to illustrate some of my points during the talk. Now, in 1964, in July and August, I spent a month in the Soviet Union. That's a long time ago. It's a country that doesn't exist anymore as such, although there's a man in the Kremlin who is doing his best to bring it all back, but we hope he won't. Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev, and people of my generation, of course, would remember Khrushchev. And in 1964, he went to visit a kolkhoz. A lot of people don't know what a kolkhoz is. It's a collective farm, коллективное хозяйство in Russian, a collective enterprise. And this is the most famous kolkhoz that produces potatoes for the Soviet Union. And Khrushchev comes up to the head of the kolkhoz and says, "No, как урожай этого года? How is the harvest of this year?" And the head of the kolkhoz says, "Oh, товарищ Khrushchev, comrade Khrushchev, it is wonderful. Potatoes all over the ground, potatoes growing on the trees, above the trees, potatoes to the very knees of God." And Khrushchev says to him, "But comrade, there is no God." And the man says, "No potatoes either." Now, that in October of 1964, Khrushchev was deposed for his shoddy management of the economy, particularly that of agriculture. And so, in order to appreciate that joke, you'd have to know what a kolkhoz is, you'd have to know what the Soviet Union was like, you'd have to know what was going on at the time in the Soviet Union. Otherwise, it wouldn't even make sense. The difficulty with Japanese humor, you need a cultural background in order to appreciate it, because any joke or any anecdote references something in the culture or in history or in society. And the other thing you need is the language. Now, I'd like to tell you a lot of very funny jokes in Japanese, but unfortunately, they don't translate well because most Japanese jokes are based on puns and plays on words, as in many languages. So I'm going to leave that out. That's the story from the Soviet Union. But one thing, in order to understand the Japanese sense of humor, you have to understand that this is a society that puts a very high premium on self-deprecation. In other words, being modest about yourself. I can tell you, if you want to be successful in Japan, make sure you can be more modest than the next guy. The person who is the most modest in any kind of discussion or any kind of encounter in Japan always wins. Of course, don't be too modest, because too much modesty is a sure sign of conceit in Japan. But the Japanese are always apologizing and and making excuses for themselves. And this becomes part of the humor. So for instance, there's an interesting little proverb in Japanese, or a saying that I've heard before. So when you attack somebody and you say, it's all your fault, it's your fault that you broke the dishes or that we didn't get that money or whatever, the other person says, yes, the fact that the post box is red and the telephone pole is high, it's all my fault. In other words, passive aggressive forms a very good kind of basis for Japanese humor. Another thing about the Japanese society, Japanese people are non-confrontational. They don't like to attack people head on. This goes through the media, this goes through society, schools. Somebody like Donald Trump, who always attacks somebody, would never, ever be popular in any kind of Japanese group or politics or any other kind in society. So we have in Australia a program called Hard Quiz, where the contestants say nasty things about the moderator, Tom Gleason, and vice versa. There's be no hard quiz in Japan. It would be called soft quiz if it were on. There are quiz programs, but you can't attack other people. It's not done. Bear that in mind, because that forms a kind of basis for a lot of both historical and contemporary Japanese humor examples. Now let's go back in history. Many people know about the haiku. A haiku is a 17-syllable poem, usually with 5 syllables in the first line, 7 syllables in the second line, and 5 syllables in the last. But not many people outside of Japan know that it has a humorous version called a senryu, S-E-N-R-Y-U. So I've translated a few senryu for you to give you an idea of the kinds of things that historically Japanese people have thought humorous. Here's one. You have to know that Hakone in Japan is a famous resort for bathing in onsen, in the baths, the hot baths. The number of guests went down in Hakone after they banned mixed bathing. Well, that's another Japanese senryu. And here's one which has a little bit of a darker turn. When 2 samurai fight, it leaves 2 widows. So that gives you an idea of the kind of subtle, whimsical nature of Japanese humor that's very traditional in Japan, and it goes way back to the Heian period, in fact, back to the 10th century. And here's one more. This is a contemporary senryu because people still write them and send them into the newspapers, and I saw this one a couple of years ago. It's rubbish dumping day today. If I don't do it, I'll be dumped myself. So what do you learn from this, even be it an ancient one or a contemporary one, is that all Japanese humor, as we see in this, is situational. It's based on something from real life, like sending out the rubbish, or people fighting, or going to the baths, and so on. The main reason why Japanese people are thought not to have a sense of humor by many people overseas is they don't tell jokes. When we meet each other, we often say, have you heard the one about the such and such? And we tell a joke. And I've often translated those jokes to Japanese people, and they all say the same thing. Why would you do that? Why do you tell a joke? What's the point? Well, just to make you laugh. But if it's not from something that you saw or experienced or read about, then they don't understand why you would tell a joke in the first place. So the humor comes from something contextual, something from the society, something from interrelationships between people. Now, the great haiku master, a haiku is a serious senryu, but most of them are actually not so serious. They're very wry and subtle and often make very trenchant comments about society. Now, the great haiku poet, the great haiku master in the past is Matsuo Basho, B-A-S-H-O. He's known by many people all around the world. He was writing in the second half of the 17th century. And here's a haiku, one of my favorite, not really one of his most famous ones, which gives a good idea of his sense of humor and why haiku are often very amusing. First of all, I'll say it in Japanese, hoping that there will be some people out there, some of you will understand it in Japanese. Michinobe no mukuge wa uma ni kuware keri. So it's very short. This is about the flower mukuge. Now, mukuge is a flower that started, it's all over the world now. It's a kind of hibiscus. It's also called the Rose of Sharon. It's the national flower, actually, of Korea, of South Korea. So Basho is traveling. As many people know, he wrote this whole series of haiku called Oku no Hosomichi, the narrow road to the deep north. He went all around Japan and writing his impressions in haiku. This is about the hibiscus flower. So that's where I've translated. It's a kind of hibiscus. Imagine him riding, he's not on a horse. Many people think he's riding on a horse because there's a horse mentioned, but he's actually in a horse-drawn carriage. He's being taken on a country road on a carriage. Here's the haiku. A hibiscus flower by the side of the road has been gobbled up by my horse. So this is just a kind of snapshot. And what does it tell you? The reason why haiku are so interesting is they're so suggestive. They're not vague and ambiguous. A lot of people say, oh, haiku are supposed to be wispy, oriental, vague, and misty. And you go, the moon, mist, and rain. That's not what haiku are all about. Haiku are very trenchant comments on society. So what do you know? Basho is on a horse-drawn carriage. He sees this beautiful flower by the side of the road, so he stops. And while he is admiring the landscape, is what he wants to do, his horse takes the opportunity to eat the flowers. So it tells you about human nature, the landscape, travel, the relationship between man and animals, in this case, the horse. Another thing that is a feature of most Japanese kinds of humor is, in a long word, incongruity. That there's a sense of surprise, a revelation, like in the haiku. He's riding along, he sees the hibiscus, he's looking at it, the horse eats the hibiscus. And the master of this kind of haiku is Kobayashi Issa, who was writing in the late 18th and early 19th century. He's from a little village called Kashiwabara in Nagano Prefecture. And if you're going to Japan, it's one of the most beautiful places in Japan. And his house is still there. And it's just a very nice place to visit. I'll give you an example of incongruity before I go into Kobayashi. The woodblock prints that were done on the Tokaido line by both Hiroshige and Hokusai have a very small Mount Fuji and something in the background. Even though this is the tallest mountain in Japan, it's not shown in its majesty as tall, although there are one or two like that as well, but it's shown as a backdrop to human things that are going along, people working, traveling, and so on. But if you look carefully, next time you see the Great Wave at Kanagawa by Hokusai, look at the water and you will notice, I think there are 3 long boats there. They're called oshikure bune, or kind of commodity boats. And in it, the men are rowing frantically through the foreground of this wave. And what they are doing is they are taking katsuo, which is a Japanese bonito fish, as quickly as they can to Edo, which is now Tokyo, to sell at the markets. And it's a kind of race. So even though there's nothing funny about this particular woodblock print, it shows very well the incongruity of nature, which is so amazing, almost like the hand of this wave is going to come down and devour these men who are in the boat. But Japan as a country was very much reliant on waterways, on getting fish and commodities by rivers and by the sea from one place to another. And Little Mount Fuji is about this big in the background. So that gives you an idea of incongruity. A haiku of Issa, which actually almost mimics this, and one that I like a lot, which I translated for you, is a frog in the evening croaks, lining up its bottom with the top of Mount Fuji. So you get this incredible image of this. You get the sound of the frog, so you know it's summer. He's not lining up his body, his bottom. That's from your angle, that's what you're seeing. This bottom is big, the frog's bottom is bigger than Mount Fuji, almost as if he's comparing it. So that's a kind of whimsical, wry sense of humor, which might not come through in the very beginning, but if you think about it. Issa also traveled all around Japan and was very poor. And he was going to a place called Matsushima. Matsushima is one of the 3 most beautiful places in Japan. It's in Miyagi Prefecture, north of Tokyo. Here's what he wrote about Matsushima. I'll show you Matsushima, then you're on your own, little fleas. So he's alone, he's poor, he can't change his clothes, he doesn't even have an inn to stay in where he can bathe. But when he gets to Matsushima, he's going to change clothes, or he's going to have he's going to bathe in the sea, and the little fleas will have to find their own way after that. Those are his only companions. So it's a kind of sad, lonely, kind of whimsical sense of humor in that one. Here's another one, which I like a lot, and this is the last one I'll read of Issa's poems. His name is ISSA, if you want to look him up. Even while strolling below the cherry blossoms, people are lecturing to each other. So this is a time in spring when it's beautiful and you're going along and the cherry blossoms are in full bloom, like now here in Australia, and the people are not enjoying the cherry blossoms. They're telling each other what's wrong with the other person and so on. So these are, consider haiku portraits, whimsical portraits of people in various myriad kinds of situations, and you will understand what Japanese people find amusing, not sort of belly laugh kind of amusing, but it's a lingering, resonant humor. Now, speaking of cherry blossoms, there was an author called Sakaguchi Ango, who was born in 1906, died in 1955, and he wrote this amazing novel, which I've translated, called Under the Cherry Blossoms in Full Bloom. This is about a bandit, an awful man who in the ancient times, who lives in the mountains, jumps onto people, kills them, takes their clothes and jewelry and whatever, and lives like that. But one day he sees a beautiful woman and he kills all of the people in her entourage. And she says, "Don't kill me and I'll marry you." So he marries her and they go to live in Miyako, which is now Kyoto. This is actually in the Heian period. And he finds out he's taken on much more than he had expected with this woman, because she makes him go out every night and steal money and jewels and clothing for her, kimonos and so on. But it's not enough. She says one night, "I want you to bring me people's heads, cut off the heads and bring me the heads." Every night, on order from the woman, he would steal into the houses of the rich. He would bring out an array of kimonos and jewels, but this was not sufficient to gratify her desires. What she wanted more than anything was the heads of the people who lived in those houses. I warn you, this gets a bit black and grotesque, but this shows the whole tradition of black humor, particularly as a parody of Japanese traditional stories. After a while, she had a collection at home of dozens of heads from people's houses. These heads sat in rows in a room with partitions all around, some of them dangling from a string. And the man couldn't remember for the life of him which head was which, because there were so many of them. But the woman had each and every one firmly planted in her head. And even when the hairs on the heads had fallen out, the flesh had rotted away, and the white skull showed through. She had no trouble whatsoever recalling whose head was whose and where it had lived. I won't bore you with this anymore, much more, but it gets much better. So here we go. Every day the woman played heads. A head takes a walk with its retainer. A head's family is entertained by the head of another family. A head makes love. There were even cases of a woman's head jilting a man's head, or a man's head rejecting the advances of a woman's head and making the woman's head cry. A princess's head was led by the nose by a famous minister of states. On a moonless night, the famous minister of state's head, pretending to be the head of a man whom the princess's head loved, stole its way into her head and tied the fatal knot with an avowal of love. After this avowal, the princess's head comes to its senses, but it cannot bring itself to despise the minister of state's head, and instead weeps over its tragic fate and becomes a nun. And when this happens, the head of this head of state goes to the convent and violates the princess's head, and I won't go on after that. But this is part of a long tradition of parody and satire, which permeates the entire dynasties of Japan. So that's Sakaguchi Ango. Another type of Japanese humor is silly, slapstick, nonsense humor. I think this is almost kind of mainstream. This kind of humor resonates with me in the way that a lot of British humor does. So the Goon Show and Monty Python and that whole tradition, and the music hall tradition of Benny Hill is very, very much still alive in Japan, and you can see it on television every night. It doesn't amount to much. It's not very sophisticated, but for a culture which puts a premium on formality and on acting with decorum and propriety outside the house, as was de rigueur in Britain once upon a time, and even in the United States. It's important that people let their hair down afterwards, and they seek entertainment which is raucous, bawdy, not profane, but just a lot of fun with slapstick and that kind of rough humor. Another very traditional kind of Japanese humor is rakugo, R-A-K-U-G-O, and this is storytellers. One person sits on a stage and for about a half an hour tells a story, a funny story about something that really happened. And some of these stories are absolutely amazing. And the one that comes to mind, which I'd like to share with you today, it's the story of an old grumpy man who's sitting at home with his wife and daughter. And the man notices a little black thing, about shaped like that, on the floor. And he says to his wife and daughter, "There's a black bean on the floor. Pick it up. Kuromame, hiroi nasai. Pick up that black bean." And the wife and daughter go, and he says, "I told you, pick up that black bean." And they laugh and look at each other. And he says, "I'm getting angry. I'm telling you to pick up that black bean." And then the black bean moves on the floor, starts to move. And the daughter says, "Papa, that's not a black bean. That's a cockroach. It's moving." And he says, "Even if it moves, it's still a black bean." It's called Ugoitemo Kuromame. I don't care if it moves. It's the name of the story is, I don't care if it moves. It's still a black bean. And when I heard this story, I really laughed a lot because I thought of my own father, who was very much like that and who would insist, not just Japanese, old stubborn man who insists he's right. And I don't care if it moves, it's still a black bean. So that's a rakugo story. Another kind of Japanese humor, which is very popular on Japanese television and on stage, is monomane, impersonations. And there's somebody called Shimizu Michiko, she's absolutely amazing. She does the most amazing interpretations of Japanese politicians, which usually isn't done, but she gets away with it, and Japanese celebrities and so on. One of my closest friends is one of the great comedians of the world, Issei Ogata. Lately, he was in Scorsese's film, The Silence. He's been in some Western films. But his main forte is doing a one-man show where he plays, I guess altogether it must be 80 to 100 different characters, men, women, construction workers, famous authors, professors, waiters, and so on. And to give you an idea he does the voices, and honestly, he has that kind of face which just becomes somebody else. He's so good at characterizing ordinary Japanese people, or typical Japanese people, I should say. And he has one where he plays a salaryman, a worker, who's a salesman, probably going out to sell insurance or something. And he finds himself in a parking lot. He doesn't know where he is at first. He's been working so hard. His tie is askew and he's got a briefcase. And we can tell he's a salaryman. And Ogata says, he's playing this guy. And he says, "Where am I? I'm not sure what, I know I've been working hard." Just to say, and he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out a name card. And he doesn't know if it's his own name card or somebody else's. So it was a kind of existential message in that. It's it's so funny. You're laughing and laughing. And then when you get to that part, you realize this man is overworked and full of stress. And, you know, it's a criticism of Japanese society. Now, anybody who's lived in Japan and has watched Japanese television will know that Japan has some of the most quirky and amazing commercials. Japanese are very good at short things like haiku and 15-second commercials. Most of the commercials are 15 seconds. My favorite one of all is for what's a kind of enterprise called in Japanese este, which is not only a kind of beauty salon, but where you can have your hair done. Women go to have their skin, they can have facials and hair. I don't know what they do there, but whatever they do, that you can do everything to be beautiful at these este places. And it opens up in this really cramped, really ordinary middle-class Japanese living room. And the daughter, you wouldn't call her a great beauty, and she's pretty ordinary looking, so just describing it. This is not my opinion. And the father's reading the newspaper and is uninterested, and the wife is washing up. And the daughter says, "That's it. I'm going to do este. I'm going now. I'm sick and tired of the way I look." And the father says, "Where are you going? You're not going anywhere." She said, "I'm going." And she goes out, and then a minute later, it's a couple of hours later, the door opens, and Naomi Campbell, the model, comes in, and she said, and she's looking absolutely gorgeous, and she says, "Tadaima, I'm back." And the father looks up and said, "Even her voice has changed." So, and that's, so that plays on a lot of things. When I said at the beginning that Japanese humor is situational, contextual, it needs to be grounded in something that we all recognize. So if you're from the outside, whatever country you come from, and you don't know a lot about Japanese society, and you don't know the conventions, and maybe you don't speak the language so well, you won't get the humor. It's not upfront in your face. It's very subtle, and it makes comments on society. Another feature of Japanese humor is, believe it or not, irreverence. The Japanese also have that, particularly in their satire and humor. Now, this is a book I published of translations of poems I did in the COVID year 2020, so I call it Poems 2020. And this is a poem by Takamura Kotaro. Now, Takamura Kotaro is a fantastically interesting character. Before the war, generally considered the greatest intellectual in Japan at the time, a sculptor, a poet, well-traveled in Europe and so on, and very critical of the Japanese until the Japanese turned militaristic in the 1930s. And he became totally gung-ho for the war effort and really changed everybody's opinion about him. After the war, he felt very contrite, and he lived some years after the war and he tried to rehabilitate himself. But this is a poem he wrote long before then, when he was still quite a radical observer of his own people. Now, many of you know what a netsuke is. It's a little ornament which has funny faces, or there are thousands of them. They're done in wood or ivory, some are in ceramic. And this poem is called The Country of Netsuke by Takamura Kotaro. With angular cheekbones and thick lips, with eyes like triangles and a face like a netsuke carved by the Grand Master Sangoro, a look that is vacant and vacuous, as if the soul had been extracted, lacking in self-knowledge, always fussing over trivialities, a vain fop who does not value life, shrimpy, implacable, smug, looks like a monkey, looks like a fox, looks like a flying squirrel, looks like a pint-sized goby, looks like a rice fish, looks like a gargoyle, looks like the chip off a teacup, the Japanese. So talk about self-knowledge and self-deprecation. He's totally critical here of the way his countrymen, because generally men, but country folks, compatriots, look and act vacuous, trivial, fussing over nothing, empty-headed. And then at the end, you don't know who he's describing, and he's describing his own people. Now, whether you would call that humor, black humor, or not, that's up to you. But certainly, it's satire and irony and sarcasm of the highest order. Masaoka Shiki, one of my favorite haiku poets who died about 120 years ago, had a great haiku that I just must read to you, which doesn't seem like it's funny, but it tells a lot about the Japanese. Autumn fly, the swatters are all full of holes. Autumn fly, the swatters are full of holes. So what does that tell you? Think, okay, well, that's just the description of something. Maybe he's holding a fly swatter and has lots of holes in it. But the autumn fly has come into existence at the end of summer after the Shiki has killed a lot of his brothers and sisters during the summer, so many that there are holes in the fly swatter. So the death of the flies before saved the life of the fly in autumn. That kind of subtle humor, I think, is very Japanese. Finally, I must tell you about the films of Ozu Yasujiro. Now, everybody who knows Ozu's films knows Tokyo Monogatari. And in the West generally, or outside of Japan, he's considered a very serious, almost Zen-like filmmaker who never moves the camera and makes all these sad films about Japanese people. And his last film, 1962, Sanma no Aji, which is called An Autumn Afternoon. If you get a chance, if you haven't seen it, it's just one of the greatest films. And there's a scene in it in a bar. Perhaps the most famous scene in it is the scene in the bar with Ryu Chishu, who's the famous old actor in Japan that Ozu used in most of his films. Behind the counter is Kishida Kyoko, the actress that I directed twice in Tokyo in the 1980s, one of the greatest actresses in Japanese cinema. You may remember a film called Woman in the Dunes, and she was the lead in that. And another friend of mine, Kato Daisuke, who was a great comedian and great actor. And the three of them, the Kishida-san is behind the bar serving drinks. And it so happens that the two men, Ryu Chishu and Kato Daisuke, were in the war together. So this is after the war. This is early 1960s. And it's not good to reminisce about the war in Japan. It isn't done, except in very right-wing circles. So it's not something that one laughs about. But Kishida-san smiles and she says, should I play that song? Shall I play that song? And they say yes. And she plays a song which during the years of militarism and imperialism was called the Military March. Dun, 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 dun. Now it's played in pachinko parlors all around Japan, and it's called Pachinko March. But before the war, it was a highly militaristic song, like we're going to go out for the country and kill people and die if we need to. And Kato Daisuke gets up, and the scene lasts over a minute, and he stands up and he starts to walk like this and salute to this music. And I just thought, even something as awful as the war that the Japanese know was their fault, whether they apologize for it or not, that can be a source of humor as well. So to sum up, Japanese humor is sophisticated, wry, subtle, suggestive, always situational, always refers to something. And so if you go to Japan and if you get to know Japan, you will find that one of the best ways to understand what makes the Japanese tick, not only now, but in the past as well, is their sense of humor. Thank you very much. I'll end it there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's fascinating, so interesting. You covered a wide range, but yes, it is now we can see the subtlety, which is very reflective of a Japanese. So Japanese as a nation, as a culture, and sophistication. It's very sophisticated.
It is.
But
Yes.
you need to know it to be able to see it. So that's really
Yes.
interesting and
Yes.
tricky as well.
Yes.
So yes, I do have quite a few questions. First one, you touched on self-deprecation. Japanese, they're very modest. And it's like Chinese. The Chinese people, they are very self-deprecative as well,
Right.
you know. So I remember once I was translating a film, and then the older gentleman prepared, and the wife, they prepared the dinner for the VIP guest from the city, and then the table was covered with the dishes. When he introduced them to the table, he said, "There are no dishes. We didn't prepare." You know,
Yeah.
like if you
Oh,
translate literally.
well, Professor
Yeah.
Han, what traditionally you said in Japan, and it's only gone out really in the last 20 years, is I doubt very much if this will suit your taste. My wife is a very bad cook. She doesn't know how, and the wife goes like this. Now that nobody does that anymore, they'll get killed in the kitchen. But and but please have it if you want to. Don't worry about it. You know, it might not suit your taste and so on. So right away, apologize profusely, and continue to apologize. And you never. And when somebody praises you, never take credit for it. Always say, "Oh, it's thanks to you," or "Thanks to my friends who helped me out." Never say, "Oh yeah, well, actually, I thought it was pretty good myself," or something like, you know, what a Western person might say if they were praised for something. Yeah, well, I think my book is pretty good, actually. Thank you very much. No way, never say that. Always. That's why Donald Trump is not well liked in Japan. It really doesn't, well, besides the tariffs, but it doesn't have to do with his politics. They don't like that style. It's not their style.
Yeah, so because you also mentioned, so like a hard quiz would not be popular in Japan, and
Yeah,
then they would go for softer quiz
yeah.
because, so, but do you think Japanese would appreciate? I mean, even if they don't do it, they would never have a show like hard quiz. But would they appreciate the way that, say Australian, they appreciate
Oh,
that
well,
harsh humor?
let's just say there are many quiz programs in Japan, and the reason why I said hard quiz is because of the insults. They
Yeah,
don't have the
yeah,
insults. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, a Japanese person, just like a person from any country, is equally capable of understanding another culture even better than the people
Yeah.
in that country. So absolutely. But if you took someone who didn't speak English well or foreign languages and had never
Yeah.
been outside of Japan, no, they probably wouldn't. But
Mm, mm,
sure, but that's of course, why would they? You know.
yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, there are a lot of Japanese here who love the Australian openness and brashness, of our humor. Very
Mm.
direct. If you look at talking pictures at the end of Insiders, you'll see our great cartoonists. I think Japanese people can understand that kind of humor very, very well.
In relation to that, do they have a stand-up comedy as in the West?
One thing that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't have time, is manzai, Manzai. And manzai is two comedians, very often speaking in Osaka dialect, because the the, the manzai comedians who are most popular from Osaka. Osaka dialect resonates in Japanese like Scout Liverpool, Liverpudlian Scouse resonates with British people. Just whatever they say, it just sounds funny. And so you have a sort of the dialect adds that little bit to it. And one is a straight person, straight man, and the other is the wise guy. And it's very fast and they tell jokes. It's very, very funny. And they're also just plain old stand-up comedians. So Kitano Takeshi, who became a very famous film director, uh, that many people know his films, and was in Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, the film that I worked on. He was originally a comedian. And so people have gone, and he still is, he makes very caustic remarks on television. He can get away with a lot of things that other people can't. Yeah, there is a stand-up comedy on television and in the theaters tradition.
Right. Because the Mensa you mentioned is very much like a Chinese one with in English translation is a crosstalk. It's also two people. One is a straight, one is a funny. So that's a traditional Chinese stand-up to a point, but it's not one-man stand-up. One-man stand-up is a very modern version. It's really coming from West. Is that same as in Japan?
No, one person comedy has existed in the vaudeville theaters. I arrived in Japan in 1967 when there were still vaudeville theaters in Kyoto and Tokyo, and I learned Japanese by going to those vaudeville theaters. And a lot of stand-up comedians are. Well, I mentioned Issei Ogata, even though he's a more sophisticated kind of stand-up comedian, he does a one-man comic show. But they don't tell jokes. It's not like the American comedians like Milton, well, the old people wouldn't know Milton Berle, but I mean, Jerry Seinfeld, or where you stand up and you actually say, my wife, she did this, and my mother-in-law did that, and so on.
Yeah, backyard family.
Yeah. That they'll wonder, why are you telling me this?
Yeah.
Well, but if they told a story and said, my wife and I, went on, or this guy and his wife went on a holiday and this happened, that's different. Yeah, there is a tradition. It didn't come from the West. It definitely didn't. It goes from, if you go back into the Edo period, there's sekkyo, chongarebushi, ukarebushi, different kinds of one-man storytelling, and women as well. Not only men, women could do it too, but mostly men. And they often sang a little bit in between. They would talk. They might do different parts of a play. They do all the parts of a play. That goes back way before Japan had contact with the West.
You mentioned that Japanese humor is very much situational. Do they have sitcoms?
No, not really. They have dramas, but not like serials. So all of the famous American coms that are shown here in Australia, of course, we share the English language, or British ones, as time goes by, or Keeping Up Appearances or whatever, or Dad's Army, all of those, or even Rowan Atkinson, the kinds of dramas, the Blackadder, they don't show in Japan. They could be, the Japanese love Western movies, and they show with subtitles or very occasionally dubbing, but mostly with subtitles. And they will see comedies, but the typical sitcom that is on once a week or even once a day, like Neighbors or Home and Away, they have dramas that are like that, but they're not funny. There may be some humor in them, but they tell a sad story. So one of the most popular genres of dramas in Japan is called the asadora. Asa is morning, dora is drama, the morning drama. And it's watched by millions of people. And that follows the story of some young woman or some young man in the Meiji period or Showa period or even now. But I wouldn't call them sitcoms. The American sitcom is not alive and well and living in Japan.
Not sort of a incongruity. You mentioned impersonation on TV, and that's very popular. And then they impersonate politicians, the celebrities in a satirical, making fun of them. I imagine being so polite in Japanese society. Can they be very offensive? Is there any censorship?
No, there's no censorship, but there's self-censorship. There are taboos in every society, and there are certain things you cannot make jokes about, and one of them is the imperial family. That's taken very seriously. Almost, one has to understand that the imperial family is a quasi-religious institution. So is the royal family in many countries, but much more so. So the British can make fun of King Charles. They can show him a spitting image as a doll and make jokes about the Queen, and that's fine. Not done, with one exception, and that was immediately after the war. So for a short time after World War II, after August 15th, 1942, some people started calling the emperor, the word for emperor is tenno, the Japanese word, tenchang, empi, or little emperor or something like that. Now, and it was a kind of nickname. And there were jokes. I could tell you one or two about them. I know them because from that period about the emperor, which are actually some of them are quite funny. And at the time, you could tell those jokes and it would be fine. But after the American occupation, the Allied occupation ended in 1952, and the emperor sort of began to gain again in stature, not as a god as he was before the war, but as a human being. But if I told the jokes that I know about the emperor that people told with impunity after the war, if I told that on Japanese television or in public, I would never appear ever again in the Japanese media, and particularly with the new Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi Sanae. She's very adamant about anybody making derogatory remarks about that sort of thing. And so the answer is there are taboos, but and you have to, if you make fun of somebody, you have to make fun of them in a friendly, positive way, and that's okay. That's certainly okay.
I have to ask this one. It's about the silly one, silly joke, silly,
Right.
especially in the Japanese TV games. There's a lot of silliness. And is that part? I mean, people enjoy. That's at SBS. We used to buy lots and lots of Japanese game shows. It's
Right.
really
I know
just
you
silly
did.
and funny. Yeah. It's kind of a release. I mean,
Yes,
you
it
don't
is.
need to think seriously, but you just laugh along. Is that part of the society because of
Sure.
working so hard and the work is a stress? So this is a type of stress relief.
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. That, as I said, in a society which puts a premium on propriety, on acting properly in public, and being, I mean, really, that's one of the nice things about Japan. Japan outside the house is a non-aggressive society. People step away from each other. They don't threaten each other. It's a very nice place to live, very good place to bring up children, as my wife and I brought up 4 children there. You feel safe. Children can feel safe. So that's certainly true. But so for a society like that, when they relax, they want to take their clothes, let their hair down, and just watch silly things and not think about all the serious matters of work and so on. But there's also one other current in Japanese culture that many people know about from the word kawaii, which means cute or adorable.
Yeah.
Generally, it means adorable, not cute. It can mean cute as well. But and the Japanese try to connect with their childhood when they watch things. So, for instance, you will see very sophisticated women dressed with the best fashion, having a Louis Vuitton bag, and dangling from the bag will be a little doll or furry sort of mascot type of thing. And that's true about entertainment as well. They don't mind seeing childish things and don't think it demeans them in any way as an adult to connect with their inner child. I actually like that about Japan. I think that's a very charming part of Japan. I think if we had more of that, we might be less stressed out too. But generally speaking, people do say that it's just a kind of escapism, easy escapism. You don't have to think, you just watch it. And it's passive. You watch television and it just goes in one ear and out the other.
Kawaii, actually,
Kawaii.
Translation in Chinese, we call it a kawaii.
Yes, I know. I heard Chinese people say kawaii.
Yeah,
kawaii.
it's meaning cute and all sorts.
Cute. Yeah. Well, it means cute, adorable, sweet.
Yeah.
Depending on the context.
And I think Korean pop culture is being influenced a lot by this kawaii.
All over the world. Hello Kitty. is
Yeah,
huge
Hello
all
Kitty is a
around.
big one. Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you, Professor
Thank
Pulvers,
you
for
very
this
much, and
wonderful
thank you
talk.
everybody for joining in.
Yes, thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.